Welcome to our deep dive into the world of persuasion.
Yes.
We're going to be cracking open Robert Cialdini's Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion.
Awesome.
The very first edition, originally published as Armas de Persuasion.
Oh, cool.
Get ready for some fascinating insights into how our minds work.
Yeah. It's exciting.
So instead of getting bogged down in theory, though, we're going to focus on those real-life stories and examples that Cialdini uses to illustrate those 6 key principles of persuasion.
Yes. I love that about this book.
Yeah.
What is so captivating about Cialdini's work is how he really blends scientific research with these, compelling anecdotes.
Yeah.
It's like he's letting you in on the secrets of human behavior, and you can't help but want to know more.
So let's dive right in. Cialdini kicks things off by introducing the concept of fixed action patterns in animals.
Yes.
He uses this great example of mother turkeys and their adorable chicks.
Yes. So, you see, these mother turkeys have an incredibly strong instinct to protect and care for their young. But the trigger for that nurturing behavior is surprisingly specific.
Okay.
It's not the sight or the smell of the chick that sets them off, but the cheep cheep sound they make.
Hold on. So if a chick doesn't make that specific sound,
Yes.
the mother turkey might just ignore it.
Yeah.
That's kind of harsh, isn't it?
It might seem that way,
Yeah.
but it highlights the power of these pre-programmed responses.
Yeah.
Even when the situation calls for something different.
Yeah.
These click-whir responses are hardwired into their brains,
Okay.
and they react instinctively without much conscious thought.
Right.
And you know what?
What?
Humans aren't all that different.
Really?
We have our own set of click-whir responses triggered by specific cues in our environment.
Okay. So I'm starting to see where this is going. You're saying we're basically running on autopilot sometimes?
Yeah,
Reacting to triggers without even realizing it.
precisely. Cialdini shares this fascinating story about a shop owner who couldn't sell her turquoise jewelry no matter what she tried.
Okay.
She even told her staff to really push it, but nothing worked.
Wow.
Then one day, an employee accidentally marked up the price, thinking it was a typo.
Uh-huh.
And guess what?
What?
The jewelry suddenly became a hot commodity.
Wait, so the jewelry started selling like crazy because it was more expensive?
Yep.
That's counterintuitive.
I know, it is.
What's the psychology behind that?
It's a classic example of the expensive equals good heuristic.
Okay.
We often equate higher prices with higher quality, especially when we're not familiar with the product or don't have the time to do a lot of research.
Right.
It's a mental shortcut, a way to simplify our decision-making process.
Okay.
But you can see how this heuristic could be exploited by it.
Absolutely. So just like those turkeys responding to the cheep cheep sound,
Yes.
we can be easily swayed by cues that trigger these automatic responses.
Yeah,
That's a little unsettling, to be honest.
it is. And Cialdini doesn't stop there. He goes on to talk about how these principles can be used by what he calls mimics,
Mimics.
individuals or even other species who copy these triggering cues for their own gain. He uses this captivating example of female fireflies
Okay.
who mimic the mating signals of another species.
Oh, wow.
They lure the unsuspecting males in, and, well, let's just say it doesn't end well for the males.
Wow, that's pretty sneaky.
Yeah,
It makes you wonder,
I
are
think-
we constantly being manipulated by these tactics without even knowing it?
it's a possibility we have to consider.
Yeah.
Understanding these principles is not just about avoiding being tricked. It's about recognizing when these same principles are being used to influence us on a larger scale
Right.
in advertising, marketing, politics,
Uh-huh.
even in our personal relationships.
So awareness is key. But how do we become more aware of these subtle influences in our daily lives? What's the next step?
Well, let's move on to the next principle,
Okay.
which is all about the powerful pull of reciprocation.
Reciprocation.
This principle highlights our innate desire to repay favors, even when those favors are unwanted.
Oh, okay.
Cialdini tells this incredible story about Ethiopia in 1985.
Okay.
The country was facing unimaginable suffering.
Right.
Famine, drought, civil war.
Yeah.
Yet amidst this devastation, the Ethiopian Red Cross sent $5,000 in humanitarian aid to Mexico following the earthquakes there.
Wow. That's a powerful example of giving back, even when you have very little to give.
Yes,
But wouldn't it have made more sense for Ethiopia to focus on their own needs at that time?
it might seem that way,
Yeah.
but there's a deeper psychological principle at play here.
Okay.
The rule of reciprocation.
Okay.
You see, back in 1935, Mexico had sent aid to Ethiopia when Italy invaded,
Uh-huh.
even though decades had passed and Ethiopia was facing its own crisis.
Yeah.
That sense of obligation to repay the favor was deeply ingrained.
So even a simple act of kindness, even one we didn't ask for, can create a sense of obligation that can last for years.
Yes.
That's pretty remarkable, isn't it?
It is, and this sense of obligation can be strong enough to override our personal preferences,
Really?
as Cialdini illustrates with a study by Dennis Regan.
Okay.
In this study, participants who received a small, unsolicited favor from a researcher, a bottle of Coke, were far more likely to buy raffle tickets from him later, even if they didn't particularly like him.
That's a bit concerning, isn't it?
It is.
It sounds like this principle could be easily exploited to get people to do things they wouldn't normally do.
You're right to be cautious.
Yeah.
Think about how the Hare Krishna Society used to use this principle.
Okay.
They would give people a flower or a small book as a gift,
Yeah.
and then ask for a donation.
Right.
It was remarkably effective for a while,
Uh-huh.
but eventually people caught on and started avoiding them.
So it seems like awareness is our best defense against these tactics.
It's
The more we understand how these principles work,
Yes.
the better equipped we are to recognize them
Right.
and resist them when necessary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
Cialdini introduces a tactic called rejection then retreat,
Rejection, then retreat.
which cleverly leverages this principle of reciprocation.
Okay.
It involves making an initial large request that's likely to be rejected,
Hmm.
and then following it up with a smaller, more reasonable request.
You know what?
What?
That reminds me of something that happened to me when I was a kid.
Oh, yeah?
A Boy Scout came to my door selling tickets to the circus. He started by asking if I wanted to buy these, like, $5 tickets.
Okay.
And I politely declined.
Uh-huh.
But then he hit me with, well, how about some chocolate bars for just $1?
Classic.
And guess who ended up buying 2 chocolate bars?
You got played.
I totally did.
It sounds like you fell for the classic rejection then retreat tactic.
Yeah.
Cialdini shares a similar anecdote in his book
Okay.
and backs it up with solid research.
Okay.
One study showed that people who were initially asked to chaperone juvenile delinquents for 2 years were far more likely to agree to a smaller request, taking the same delinquents to the zoo for an afternoon, compared to those who were only asked about the zoo trip.
So even though I felt like I was getting a better deal by buying the chocolate bars,
Yeah.
I was actually being subtly manipulated into making a purchase I hadn't planned on.
Yeah.
That's a bit unnerving, isn't it?
It is. And what's even more chilling is that Cialdini suggests this tactic might have played a role in the Watergate scandal.
What?
He proposes that G. Gordon Liddy,
Okay.
the mastermind behind the Watergate break-in, might have intentionally presented ludicrously expensive initial proposals,
Okay.
knowing they would be rejected.
Hmm.
This set the stage for the eventual approval of the actual break-in plan,
Oh, wow.
which, while still ill-advised, seemed more reasonable in comparison.
Wow. That's a scary thought. It's amazing how these seemingly harmless tactics can be used to influence decisions with such high stakes. Makes you wonder how often we're being influenced without even realizing it.
That's the power of persuasion. It often operates beneath our conscious awareness,
Right.
tapping into these deep-seated psychological principles.
Yeah.
But don't worry, the more we understand these principles,
Yeah.
the better equipped we are to navigate the world of influence
Right.
and make informed decisions.
Okay. I'm ready for more. What's the next principle we're going to unpack?
Let's talk about commitment and consistency.
Okay.
We, as humans, have this deep desire to be seen as consistent in our beliefs and actions.
Uh-huh.
And this desire can be harnessed to influence us in ways we might not even realize.
Oh, okay. I can see how that can be powerful. Give me an example of how this principle works in real life.
Well, think about those toy companies Cialdini talks about.
Okay.
He explains how some companies create artificial shortages of certain toys before Christmas.
You're kidding. So they deliberately make it harder to find the must-have toy of the season?
Yep.
But why would they do that?
It's brilliant, really, from a marketing perspective.
Yeah.
Parents promise their kids a specific toy,
Right.
but when they go to buy it, it's sold out everywhere.
Yeah.
So they end up buying other toys to make up for it.
Yeah.
And
I
then,
see where this is going.
after Christmas, the toy company magically has the sold-out toy back in stock.
Right.
And now the parents feel obligated to buy it because they already promised their kids. It's like
Yeah.
they've been set up.
Exactly. And this principle isn't just limited to toy marketing.
No.
Cialdini points out that this principle was even used during the Korean War by Chinese communists to obtain compliance from American POWs.
Yes.
They would start with small requests, writing down statements that were slightly critical of America,
Right.
and gradually escalate to larger requests, like signing petitions and even making public broadcasts denouncing the U.S. That's a chilling example of how even small commitments can snowball into larger ones. It really highlights the power of consistency in shaping our self-image and future behavior. But how do we know when we're being manipulated by this principle?
Cialdini cites a fascinating study where people who agreed to display a small "Drive Safely" sign in their window were later far more likely to agree to a much larger and uglier "Drive Safely" sign on their front lawn.
Huh.
That initial, seemingly insignificant commitment paved the way for a much bigger one.
So it's almost like once we take that first step, we feel compelled to stay on that path, even if it leads us somewhere we didn't intend to go.
Yeah.
What's the key takeaway here?
Be mindful of the commitments you make.
Right.
Even the ones that seem small or inconsequential,
Okay.
they can have a ripple effect influencing your future choices in ways you might not anticipate.
That's a really valuable insight. It makes you want to pause and really think before you commit to anything, no matter how small.
Absolutely. Now let's shift gears and explore the fascinating world of social proof. This principle basically states that we look to others' behavior to determine what is correct,
Right.
especially in situations where we're unsure or feel ambiguous.
Yeah, I think we all do that to some extent, right? Like when you're at a restaurant and you're not sure what to order, you kind of look around to see what other people are eating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a natural human tendency,
Right.
especially when we're in unfamiliar territory.
Yeah.
Cialdini tells this incredibly captivating story
Okay.
about a doomsday cult
Okay.
that predicted a specific date for a catastrophic flood.
Right.
They were so convinced it was going to happen,
Mm.
they even gave away all their belongings.
Oh, I remember reading about that.
Yeah.
And then the flood didn't happen, right?
Yeah.
I'm guessing that was the end of the cult?
You'd think so, but that's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Their belief actually intensified after the flood failed to occur.
Wait, what?
I know.
Why would their belief get stronger after their prediction was proven wrong? That doesn't make sense.
It might seem counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but it's a classic example of how social proof can backfire.
Hmm.
They had already committed so much,
Yeah.
both physically and emotionally,
Right.
to this belief that when it didn't come true,
Yeah.
they doubled down on their efforts to convert others.
Right.
It's almost as if they were trying to validate their commitment by getting others to buy into it.
Mm.
The more people they could convince, the more real it seemed.
So in a way, they were using social proof to convince themselves that they were right all along,
Yes.
even though the evidence contradicted their beliefs.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this principle of social proof can have far-reaching consequences,
Oh, okay.
even in life or death situations.
Wow.
Cialdini uses the tragic case of Kitty Genovese to illustrate what's known as the bystander effect.
Oh, yes. I've heard about that case. It's a really disturbing example of how social proof can work against us in the worst possible way.
It is.
For those who aren't familiar with it, Kitty Genovese was murdered outside her apartment building in New York City in 1964. And what's horrifying is that 38 people witnessed the attack,
Right.
but no one called the police until after she was dead.
It's a stark and tragic example of how social proof can create a diffusion of responsibility.
Yeah.
Each witness assumed that someone else would take action, and in the process, everyone became paralyzed.
Right.
They looked to each other for cues on how to react, and because no one else was doing anything, they assumed it wasn't really an emergency.
So what's the lesson here? If you're ever in a situation like that, how do you break through that bystander effect and get the help you need?
Cialdini offers some practical advice for overcoming the bystander effect.
Okay.
First, be specific.
Okay.
Don't just yell for help.
Right.
Single out an individual in the crowd. Make eye contact,
Yeah.
and clearly articulate what's happening and what you need.
That's a really important point. By breaking through that ambiguity and directly engaging someone, you're more likely to get a response. It's like you're removing their excuse for inaction.
Exactly. And speaking of the power of situations to influence our behavior,
Yeah.
we can't talk about persuasion without discussing the sway of authority figures.
Okay.
This principle explores how we're often unconsciously influenced by those we perceive as having expertise or power.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to that. We're conditioned from a young age to respect and obey authority figures, whether it's our parents or teachers or law enforcement.
Right.
But when does that respect for authority become a problem?
It becomes a problem when we blindly obey authority
Yeah,
without questioning or considering the potential consequences of our actions.
right.
Cialdini dives into the infamous Milgram experiment,
Okay.
which is one of the most controversial and thought-provoking studies in psychology.
For those who aren't familiar with it, the Milgram experiment involved participants who are instructed to administer electric shocks to another person who is supposedly in a separate room. The shocks weren't real, of course, but the participants believed they were.
Exactly. And what's truly shocking about this experiment
Yeah.
is that 65% of the participants were willing to administer what they thought were potentially fatal shocks simply because an authority figure, in this case the experimenter, told them to do so.
That's a staggering statistic. It really highlights the dangers of blind obedience, especially in fields like medicine, where authority is highly valued. It makes you wonder if we're all capable of doing things we never thought possible if we're under the influence of a strong authority figure.
It's a sobering thought. And it's not just medical authority that can influence us. Cialdini talks about how marketers exploit our respect for authority to sell products and
All
services.
right.
Remember the Sanka coffee commercials with Robert Young?
Oh, yeah.
He was famous for playing a doctor on TV,
Yeah.
and he was the perfect spokesperson to sell decaf coffee because people associated him with medical authority, even though he wasn't a real doctor.
Oh, wow. I remember those commercials.
Yeah.
It's amazing how easily we can be swayed by these associations. So the message here is question authority. Be respectful, but don't be afraid to ask for clarification, challenge assumptions, and think for yourself.
Absolutely. It's about finding a balance between respecting authority and maintaining our own critical thinking skills.
Right.
And finally, we come to the magnetic pull of scarcity.
Okay.
The basic idea here is that opportunities seem more valuable to us when they're less available.
Yeah, that's like that old saying, you always want what you can't have.
Right.
It's human nature to crave things that are rare or hard to get.
Exactly. And Cialdini shares an anecdote about the Mormon temple in Mesa, Arizona.
Okay.
He wasn't particularly interested in seeing it,
Uh-huh.
but when he learned that his specific area was only open to the public for a limited time, he was suddenly intrigued. That restricted access made it more desirable.
That makes sense. It's like that feeling you get when you see a limited edition product or a one-time only sale.
Yep.
It creates a sense of urgency, like you have to act now or miss out.
Yes.
But is that just a marketing ploy, or is there something deeper going on psychologically?
There's definitely a psychological component at play here.
Okay.
It's called psychological reactance.
Psychological reactance.
Essentially, when something's restricted or taken away from us, we tend to crave it even more.
Okay.
It's like a rebellious impulse.
Yeah.
We want what we're told we can't have.
So it's not just about the product itself, but about our freedom of choice being threatened.
Right.
I guess that's why those limited time offers are so effective. They tap into that sense of urgency and make us feel like we have to act quickly.
Precisely. And Cialdini even relates this principle to the terrible twos in teenage rebellion.
Oh, wow.
Those phases are marked by a strong drive for autonomy and resistance to control.
Yeah.
He also shares a fascinating example of how this principle played out in Miami when the city banned phosphate detergents. The ban actually backfired, leading residents to smuggle in the banned product,
Wow.
and even rated as superior to other detergents.
So by trying to restrict access to the phosphate detergents, they actually made them more desirable.
They did.
That's pretty ironic, isn't it?
It is, and it highlights the power of scarcity to influence our perceptions and behaviors. And it's not just limited to products. Cialdini even mentions the Romeo and Juliet effect, where parental interference can actually intensify romantic feelings in couples.
Wow. So scarcity can be a powerful motivator in all sorts of situations, from consumer choices to romantic relationships. But how do we know when we're being genuinely persuaded by something's scarcity versus just falling prey to a manipulative tactic?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it leads us perfectly into the next part of our deep dive. It is about stepping back and asking yourself, would I still want this if it were readily available? Sometimes that sense of urgency can cloud our judgment and make us make impulsive decisions that we later regret.
That's so true. I know I've definitely fallen for that trap before.
Yeah.
It's like that fear of missing out takes over and you end up buying something you don't really need
Yeah.
or even want.
Yeah, it's a powerful psychological trigger.
Yeah.
But awareness is key.
Right.
By recognizing this principle, we can start to separate our genuine desires from those that are artificially inflated by scarcity.
So to recap, we've delved into 5 of Cialdini's principles of persuasion. Clicks were responses,
Right.
reciprocation,
Huh.
rejection, then retreat,
Yeah.
commitment and consistency,
Yes.
and social proof.
Right.
We've seen how these principles can be used for good or for ill.
Yes.
And we've learned some valuable strategies for resisting manipulation.
We have.
But there's one more principle we need to explore: the sway of authority.
Ah, yes. The power of the white coat, the badge, the uniform.
Right.
We're conditioned from a young age to respect and obey authority figures. But as we've seen with the Milgram experiment, that blind obedience can have dangerous consequences.
You know, it's interesting because we often associate authority with expertise and trustworthiness.
Yeah.
We assume that people in positions of authority have earned their status through knowledge, experience, or skill. But is that always the case?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's one we should always be asking ourselves.
Right.
Just because someone has a title or a uniform doesn't automatically mean they're always right or that we should blindly follow their instructions.
So how do we navigate this tricky terrain of authority? How do we balance respect for legitimate authority with critical thinking and independent judgment?
It's a delicate balance, for sure.
Yeah.
On the one hand, we need to acknowledge that there are genuine experts out there
Right.
who have valuable knowledge and experience to share.
Yeah.
We rely on doctors, lawyers, scientists, engineers,
Right.
and countless other professionals to guide us and keep us safe.
Uh-huh.
But on the other hand, we need to be wary of those who might exploit our respect for authority for their own gain.
That makes sense. It's like that old saying, trust but verify.
Exactly.
So what are some red flags we should watch out for? How can we tell if someone is abusing their authority?
One red flag is when someone tries to pressure you into making a decision without giving you time to think it over or seek a second opinion.
Okay.
Another red flag is when someone uses their authority to intimidate or silence dissent. And, of course, if someone is asking you to do something that feels unethical or illegal, that's a huge red flag.
Those are all great points. It's so important to remember that we have the right to question authority,
Yeah,
to ask for clarification, and to say no if something doesn't feel right.
absolutely. It's about being assertive, not aggressive.
Right.
It's about advocating for yourself and your values, even when you're dealing with someone in a position of authority.
Yeah.
And sometimes it might even mean challenging that authority if you believe they're acting unethically or abusing their power.
That takes courage, doesn't it? It can be intimidating to stand up to someone who has more power or status than you do. But sometimes it's the right thing to do.
You're right. It's not always easy,
Right.
but it's an important part of being an informed and empowered individual. And, this whole conversation about authority makes me think about another fascinating aspect of Cialdini's work.
Okay.
The role of credibility in persuasion.
Credibility. How does that tie into what we've been talking about?
Well, credibility is essentially the believability of a communicator.
Okay.
It's about whether we perceive someone as trustworthy, knowledgeable, and reliable.
Right.
And as you can imagine, credibility plays a huge role in how persuasive someone is.
Yeah.
We're much more likely to be swayed by someone we see as credible,
Right.
even if we don't necessarily agree with them.
That makes perfect sense. If someone has a reputation for being honest and knowledgeable, we're more likely to trust their opinions and recommendations. But how do we determine someone's credibility? What are the factors that influence our perceptions?
Cialdini highlights several factors that contribute to credibility.
Yeah.
One is expertise. We tend to see people as more credible if they have specialized knowledge or skills in a particular area. For example, we're more likely to trust a doctor's advice about our health than a mechanic's advice, even if the mechanic is a really nice guy.
Right. It's about matching the messenger to the message.
Yeah.
We want to hear from people who have the right qualifications and experience to speak on a particular topic.
Yeah.
But expertise isn't the only factor, is it?
No, it's not. Another crucial element is trustworthiness.
Okay.
We're more likely to believe someone if we perceive them as honest, sincere, and having our best interests at heart.
Yeah.
Think about it. Would you rather buy a used car from a salesperson who seems pushy and evasive, or from someone who is straightforward and transparent about the car's history?
Definitely the straightforward one. It's all about building that rapport and establishing trust. If you feel like someone is trying to manipulate you or hide something, you're not going to believe anything they say.
Exactly. And another important factor in credibility is dynamism. This refers to the energy and enthusiasm that a communicator brings to their message.
Okay.
People who are passionate and engaging are often perceived as more credible than those who seem bored or indifferent.
That makes sense. If someone is truly passionate about what they're talking about, it's contagious. It makes you want to listen and learn more.
Yes.
But how do we know if someone's dynamism is genuine or if it's just an act?
That's a good question.
Yeah,
And it's one that requires careful observation and critical thinking.
right.
Sometimes people can fake enthusiasm,
Yeah,
especially if they're trying to sell us something.
right.
But true passion is usually pretty easy to spot.
Okay.
It shines through in their words, their body language, and their overall demeanor.
So it's about looking beyond the surface,
Yeah,
paying attention to those subtle cues, and trusting our gut instincts.
right.
If something feels off or too good to be true,
Yes.
it probably is.
You've got it. And this whole conversation about credibility makes me think about another fascinating aspect of persuasion,
Okay.
the power of stories.
Stories. How do stories fit into the picture?
Well, think about it.
Yeah.
We've been talking about Cialdini's principles of persuasion
Yeah.
and what has made our conversation so engaging.
Mm.
It's the stories,
Yeah.
the anecdotes, the real-life examples, the personal experiences.
Right.
These are the things that bring these principles to life and make them relatable.
That's so true. It's much easier to understand and remember a concept when it's illustrated with a compelling story. Stories have a way of capturing our attention, stirring our emotions, and making us feel connected to the message.
Exactly. And this is where Cialdini's work really shines.
Right.
He's a master storyteller.
Yeah.
And he uses stories to illustrate his points in a way that is both memorable and persuasive.
I'm starting to see how powerful storytelling can be. It's not just about entertainment, it's about connection, empathy, and persuasion. It's about tapping into our shared human experiences and making us feel something.
You've hit the nail on the head. And you know what's really interesting?
What?
Our brains are actually wired to respond to stories.
Hmm.
When we hear a story, our brains release a cocktail of chemicals, including dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins.
Wow.
These chemicals make us feel good,
Uh-huh.
help us remember the story, and even motivate us to take action.
Wow, that's fascinating. So by telling stories, we're not just conveying information.
Right.
We're actually triggering a physiological response in our listener.
Precisely. And this is why stories are so powerful for persuasion. When we tell a story that resonates with our audience, we're creating a connection on an emotional level.
Yeah.
We're making them feel something.
Very.
And that emotional connection can be far more persuasive than any logical argument.
So if we want to be more persuasive, we need to become better storytellers.
Yes.
But how do we do that? Where do we find these compelling stories?
Stories are everywhere.
Yeah.
They're in our own lives,
Yeah.
in the lives of people around us, in history books, in the news, in movies, in songs.
Yeah.
The world is full of stories just waiting to be told.
You're right. I never thought about it that way before. So it's about being observant, paying attention to the world around us, and finding those nuggets of human experience that we can use to illustrate our points and connect with our audience.
Exactly. And, sometimes the most powerful stories are the simplest ones.
Hmm.
The personal anecdotes, the everyday experiences that we can all relate to.
Right.
Those are the stories that stay with us long after we've heard them.
That's so true. I think back to some of the stories we've discussed today.
Yeah.
The mother turkeys and their chicks,
Uh-huh.
the turquoise jewelry,
Right.
the Boy Scout and the chocolate bars.
Yes.
Those are the things that have really stuck with me.
And that's the power of storytelling. It's about finding those universal truths, those shared human experiences, and presenting them in a way that is both engaging and memorable.
So to wrap this up, we've talked about the psychology of persuasion,
Yeah.
explored Cialdini's 6 principles,
Good.
and delved into the power of credibility and storytelling.
Yes,
It's been quite a journey.
it has.
But where do we go from here?
Yeah.
How do we take all of this knowledge and apply it to our own lives?
That's a great question, and it leads us perfectly into the final part of our deep dive.
Right.
That's where the real learning begins.
Okay.
It's not about becoming a master manipulator or anything like that.
Right.
It's about using this understanding to become a more savvy communicator,
Yeah.
a more discerning decision maker,
Okay.
and a more confident individual.
Okay. I like the sound of that. So it's not just about defending ourselves against manipulation.
Right.
It's about using these principles in a positive way.
Exactly. Think about it. We're constantly trying to persuade people in our daily lives, whether we're trying to convince our boss to give us a raise,
Right.
get our kids to eat their vegetables,
Yeah.
or even just persuade a friend to watch our favorite movie.
You're right. I never thought of it that way, but persuasion is everywhere.
It's
It's part of the fabric of human interaction.
It is.
Yeah.
And by understanding these principles,
Yeah.
we can become more effective communicators,
Okay.
build stronger relationships,
Mm-hmm.
and achieve our goals in a way that is both ethical and persuasive.
Okay, I'm starting to see the light. But where do we start? What's the first step in putting this knowledge into practice?
The first step is awareness.
Okay.
We need to become more conscious of how these principles are operating in our own lives and in the world around us.
Right.
Start paying attention to the messages you're bombarded with every day in advertising, in the news, in social media,
Uh-huh.
and see if you can spot the 6 principles at play.
That's a great idea. It's like a game.
It
It's spot the persuasion tactic.
Exactly.
I bet once you start looking for them, you'll be amazed at how often they pop up.
You will.
Hmm.
And as you become more aware of these tactics,
Yeah.
you'll also start to notice the ones that work on you and the ones that don't.
Hmm.
This will help you refine your own persuasive style and become a more effective communicator.
So it's about becoming more self-aware,
Yeah,
more mindful of how we're being influenced and how we're influencing others.
exactly. And another important step is to practice using these principles in your own communication.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to experiment,
Right.
to try different approaches and see what works best for you.
Okay,
And
right.
remember,
Yeah.
it's not about manipulating people. It's about connecting with them,
Right.
building trust,
Okay.
and ultimately inspiring them to take action.
So it's about using these principles ethically and responsibly,
Yes.
always with the intention of creating a win-win situation.
Absolutely. And, one of the most valuable lessons I've learned from Cialdini's work is the importance of authenticity.
Mm.
People can spot a phony a mile away
Right.
if you're not genuine.
Yeah.
If you're not passionate about what you're trying to communicate, it's not going to work.
That makes so much sense. It's like that old saying, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about building relationships, connecting with people on a human level, and showing that you genuinely care about their needs and interests.
So it's not just about the message, it's about the messenger. It's about who we are, how we show up, and how we connect with others.
You've got it.
Yeah.
And, as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of persuasion, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
The most persuasive people
Mm-hmm.
are often the ones who are most persuasive with themselves.
Oh, that's an interesting thought. What do you mean by that?
It means that they've done the inner work.
Okay.
They've explored their own values, beliefs, and motivations.
Mm-hmm.
They're clear about what they stand for and what they want to achieve.
Yeah.
And that inner clarity gives them a powerful sense of purpose and conviction
Yeah.
that shines through in their communication.
That's a really powerful insight. It's like that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Right.
If we want to persuade others, we need to start by persuading ourselves. We need to believe in what we're saying
Yes.
and be passionate about our message.
Precisely. So my challenge to you is to take some time to reflect on your own values and beliefs.
Okay.
What do you stand for? What do you want to achieve in your life?
Right.
And how can you use these principles of persuasion to make a positive impact on the world around you?
That's a great challenge. I think this deep dive has given me a whole new perspective on communication and persuasion.
Good.
It's not just about getting what you want. It's about connecting with others, building relationships, and creating a world where everyone feels heard and understood.
Beautifully said. And the best part is
Right.
that learning never ends. The more we explore these principles, the more we discover about ourselves and the fascinating world of human interaction.
I completely agree. This has been an incredible journey, and I can't wait to see where it leads me next. So to all of you listening out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the psychology of persuasion. We hope you've enjoyed the ride and that you've gained some valuable insights that you can apply to your own life. Till next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep connecting.